North Korea, the most mysterious country on the planet. When we talk about North Korea, what comes to mind? Year-round military parades and nuclear weapons tests? A mischievous chubby kid with a funny hairstyle weighing over 200 pounds? Or the repetitive echoes of traditional media warning you about the impending collapse of the world's last and evilest socialist country? Come on, none of those portray the complete picture of North Korea. From what I know, the majority of Americans have no idea about its exact location or the history and reasons behind its existence. How can you believe the media's claims that this country is on the verge of collapse tomorrow? Indeed, perhaps one day in the distant future, the authoritarian regime of North Korea will disappear in ways we cannot fathom, but certainly not tomorrow. It is fundamentally different from the Soviet Union we once defeated. The North Korean regime possesses advantages and flexibility that the Soviet Union lacked, such as being a small nation with a homogeneous population, lacking geopolitical pressure, and having a hereditary system, among others. This means the United States absolutely cannot approach the North Korea issue with the same lens used for the Soviet Union. Unfortunately, this is a misconception that our foolish politicians repeatedly fall into. To predict what might happen after the collapse of the North Korean regime, let us first delve into how this country came into existence and why it is the way it is today. For over 1,000 years, Korea was a single country along with South Korea. Due to geographical reasons, ancient Korea was greatly influenced by China, adopting Chinese ideologies, writing systems, political structures, and way of life. This influence peaked around the 1400s when ancient China and Korea established a unique relationship known as suzerain and vassal relationship. The Korean king was nominally a vassal of the Chinese emperor and needed recognition from China to ascend to the throne. In return, China took responsibility for protecting Korea's security, preventing aggression from surrounding countries, particularly Japan, and safeguarding the Korean king's ruling power. This relationship repeated itself until 1895 when a corrupt China and a weakened emperor could no longer resist Japan's well-equipped modern military. As a result of this war, Korea completely severed ties with China and gradually became a part of Japan's territory. Japan ruled over Korea for 50 years until the end of World War II when Korea regained its freedom. However, freedom came at a cost. After Japan's surrender, the United States, concerned about Soviet expansion on the Korean peninsula, proposed a division along the 38th parallel. Soon after, South Korea and North Korea were established on either side of the 38th parallel, with the United States and the Soviet Union backing them, respectively. In fact, looking back from the present perspective, the division of the 38th parallel of latitude had significant flaws. Apart from roughly dividing the Korean peninsula, there was no geographical, cultural, or ethnic basis for such a division. Many Koreans opposed the existence of the 38th parallel, and Kim Il-sung was the first to act on these ideas. He visited powerful allies, Stalin and Mao Zedong, and quickly launched an attack on South Korea. Initially, the North Korean military was successful and almost occupied the entire Korean peninsula. However, the situation reversed when the U.S. military landed in Incheon and joined the side of South Korea. The North Korean army began to retreat, and Kim Il-sung and his troops even sought refuge in China to evade the U.S. Air Force. However, when millions of Chinese troops decided to intervene in the conflict, the situation changed again. The Chinese believed that they had the same obligation as their ancestors to protect the security of Korea. After 3 years of brutal warfare, the division line between South and North Korea returned to a position similar to before the war. Although North Korea did not reunify the entire peninsula, it continued to exist as a communist regime. After the collapse of the Soviet Union, North Korea faced significant challenges in its economy and diplomacy. In the midst of internal and external troubles, the helpless Kim Il-sung passed away, and his son Kim Jong-il, a greedy and cunning politician, succeeded him. Under his rule, North Korea experienced the largest floods in history, followed by a nationwide famine lasting over 5 years. Over 1/10 of the population starved to death due to a lack of food, while others barely survived on less than 0.5 pounds of poor-quality food each day. In contrast, Kim Jong-il indulged in pursuing exquisite and delicious cuisine from around the world, fine wines, and skilled chefs. He also used the aid provided by the US and South Korea for humanitarian reasons as funds for developing nuclear weapons and missiles. He succeeded, and during his reign, North Korea finally conducted nuclear tests. Before his death, Kim Jong-il handed over all power to his third son, Kim Jong-un, the current supreme leader of North Korea. Due to his education in Switzerland, many people hope that under his rule, North Korea would initiate modernization reforms inspired by the West or China. Unfortunately, with the outbreak of a palace coup, the leader of the reformists, who was also Kim Jong-un's uncle, was secretly executed, and the spark of reform was extinguished. Even today, there are no signs of improvement in North Korea. Instead, the number of people fleeing from North Korea to China continues to increase, famines occur more frequently in the land, and its international trade becomes increasingly isolated. However, do these pieces of evidence indicate that the end of the North Korean regime is imminent? Not quite. Despite being young, Kim Jong-un, the mischievous, little fatty, possesses extensive experience in ruling an authoritarian country. Since he could speak, he has been educated on how to govern such a totalitarian state. His grandfather, Kim Il-sung, and his father, Kim Jong-il, have always passed down their knowledge and left behind many brutal yet effective tools of governance, including class segregation, military-first politics, brainwashing education, travel restrictions, counterfeit US dollar printing, arms and drug trafficking, and the most dangerous of all, nuclear weapons. Due to the terrifying effectiveness of these dark and violent methods, it is difficult to imagine what would happen to the world if the North Korean regime suddenly collapses. However, if we set aside all known factors and simulate the consequences of a North Korean collapse in an alternate world, the answer we obtain might surprise you. On a future day, God suddenly decided to abandon Kim Jong-un and his evil regime, giving 20 million North Korean citizens control over their own destiny. What will they do? In my opinion, this matter requires solving 3 stages of challenges to bring the country back to a stable track. The first stage challenge is how to obtain food. If this is an unexpected event, more than half of North Koreans would choose to escape to China. The reason is simple: in this country with extreme food shortages, the sudden disappearance of the existing food distribution system, despite being highly unfair and backed by a violent apparatus, would lead to even greater inequality and widespread chaos. Crossing the heavily mined military confrontation zone and heading south to South Korea by land means choosing a road of death. Therefore, at the beginning of the collapse, seeking food and survival opportunities in China, where border control is relatively lenient, would be the optimal choice for most North Koreans. The second stage challenge is who will take over North Korea. Certainly, these suddenly surging refugees are a huge headache for Beijing. However, the more difficult problem is who will take control of this anarchic communist country and quickly restore order? Will it be the United States? That possibility is unlikely. Although the United States has been the most powerful country on this planet, its power is not unlimited. Beijing has always opposed the United States crossing what it considers to be a security distance, as demonstrated by the war 70 years ago. However, China would not be willing to directly rule or support a puppet regime to personally address this trouble. The reason is simple. China's economy is currently in a period of rapid growth, and it will not burden itself with the troubles of neighboring countries. Taking over North Korea means solving the survival problem of 20 million North Koreans, and food supply alone would cost billions of dollars annually. Whether it is the astute Chinese government or the cunning US Congress, neither would be willing to allocate such a budget. Therefore, on this issue, the long-standing confrontation between China and the United States would ironically reach an unspoken understanding, which is to pressure nearby South Korea to bear the cost of taking over North Korea. In other words, to make it a pitiable scapegoat. The third stage challenge is, what will South Korea do? Unfortunately, South Korea has no choice. Although it has claimed sovereignty over the entire Korean peninsula for decades, it cannot bear the consequences when North Korea truly collapses. During the reunification of East and West Germany's per capita GDP was twice that of East Germany, which brought about many social problems. Today, South Korea's per capita GDP is 50 times that of North Korea, and this terrifying gap would cause enormous conflicts during the initial contact between these two ideologically distinct societies. At the same time, accepting a country with a population of over 20 million living in extreme poverty, including millions of communists, would impose huge costs in terms of livelihood and management, pushing South Korea, which has already become a developed country, back into poverty. The South Korean people, whose living standards have significantly declined due to assisting North Korea, would launch a rebellion due to dissatisfaction, and ultimately, stability can only be restored with the help of NATO or the United Nations. Optimistically speaking, it would take 5 to 10 years to rebuild order in society. Of course, by that time, a unified Korea would have lost any prosperity. And finally, the most important point, what about the nuclear weapons? Undoubtedly, preventing these nuclear bombs from falling into the hands of terrorists is the Pentagon's top priority. However, in my opinion, this is precisely the least worrisome issue in the entire event. It is estimated that North Korea possesses dozens of nuclear bombs, with most of them stored in Hamgyong province, near the Chinese border. Once the collapse occurs, Beijing can swiftly take control of these nuclear bombs. For Beijing, they don't want malicious actors to use nuclear bombs to threaten the Manchuria region, nor do they want South Korea to acquire this dangerous weapon. Otherwise, the Chinese would once again face a neighbor armed with nuclear weapons. Therefore, please believe that the Chinese will handle this matter properly. After all, they are much closer to the threat of these nuclear bombs than we are. Overall, although many Americans consider the existence of the North Korean regime a tragedy, this video tells you that the collapse of North Korea would turn this tragedy into a complete disaster. Like and follow me for more interesting topics.